Hello, it's Paula again, the Working Whiskey Woman. I hope you enjoyed my first video where I kind of introduced about whiskey tasting and bourbon tasting. Again, you're going to hear me use those interchangeably, but remember, every bourbon is a whiskey, but not every whiskey is a bourbon. That being said, you might be curious about trying new things and going out, and when you decide to go out for a cocktail or something like that, you may want to question, well, what should I try? So I'm going to introduce you to some different families, because the one thing that you'll hear as you start getting into whiskey/bourbon is you'll hear about Bland's. Bland's is actually from Buffalo Trace, which is a distillery, and they make very many fine products. So they actually started, I believe it was the OFC, and then they basically, which was started by Colonel E.H. Taylor, and they bought out different things at different times, and about 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, became Buffalo Trace. They're one of the largest distillers in Kentucky, and they're one of my favorites to start. So there's different products that you'll get from the different distilleries, and this is a fine example of the types of things that they have to offer. Now, the one I mentioned last time was Buffalo Trace. This is a Buffalo Trace. It's generally, you'll find this on the bar. It's maybe not your dive bars, but you shouldn't be drinking whiskey in a dive bar anyway. We don't want to do that. Anyway, that being said, Buffalo Trace is a very good, usually a blended. Sometimes it's a single barrel, depending upon where you're buying it from. So, for example, this is a single barrel because it was from the store that actually chose the single barrel. That can really be helpful if you find basically a liquor store or anywhere that sells liquor that you can kind of get to talk to the owner a little bit. If they will talk to you about bourbon, then it's worth your while to spend a little time there and get to know them. Sometimes they'll even give you little samples, but you can basically try and understand whose palate maybe that you like. Everybody has a different palate. That's the unique thing. Besides us women having more taste buds, we also have extremely unique palates. And also, again, relative to experience, etc., etc. So this is one of my favorites. So I'm gonna try this one. And as you can see, the color is actually pretty nice. It's a little bit lighter. And the smell I get off of this is a little bit more cinnamon notes. So there's a little bit more cinnamon, a little bit of allspice kind of going on. It reminds me a little bit of kind of going into fall as you start kind of, making apple pies and kind of getting all that nice stone fruit that starts coming in the fall, at least in Michigan. From a taste standpoint, that kind of continues on the palate, where you're tasting a lot more of that cinnamon, kind of like a little cinnamon, a little bit of a cinnamon sugar kind of candy. Again, I'm going to put my water in and see how that changes the flavor. And I'm starting to note a lot more apple coming off of it. And I'm really getting a lot more of the wood out. Basically the oak. It gives me a little bit more like walnut flavor to it. You'll notice a lot more nut flavors. This reminds me of a nice fall afternoon up in northern Michigan, where you see all the beautiful leaves. And it's just that kind of time where it's just kind of going into a little bit colder. You don't want something that's a little too sweet. Just kind of get you kind of settled in. So that's kind of what I taste off the Buffalo Trace. Now, Eagle Rare is another flagship brand from Buffalo Trace. And this one has a different different profile. They tried to make them very different. Usually this is a blend. This one in particular is a single barrel. Again, because I was fortunate enough to be able to find one from basically an owner or a party store who has a palate similar to mine. So this one seems a little bit lighter than the Buffalo Trace, although you can see they're about relatively the same type of color, so they're about the same age. The longer it stays in the barrel, generally more of that color you'll get, so you'll see that deeper color kind of come in. Now this one has a whole different scent. This one is very floral. It's got a lot of lilac on it. It has a little bit of gladiola as well as a little bit of zinnia, I'd say, but definitely more like lilac hyacinth nose on it. And trying it and drinking it, you get a lot more of that floral flavor coming off of it. It's got a lot more herbal notes. It makes me think of thyme, marjoram, maybe a smidge of oregano. So let's put a little water in it. See how it changes. And now I'm getting a little bit more of a very subtle nut note, more of like kind of a hazelnut. It's not as sweet, but again, it's a very floral type of flavor. So if you're not somebody who's into something sweeter, this is a really nice kind of different change up. I really enjoy bourbons like this because it kind of gives you something that's a different note than just that candy sweet thing that you're normally used to. Once you kind of break your palate in, if you've had, you know, pleasant experiences in, you know, farm country where I grew up, and I just remember my mother's herbs, and she had all this beautiful herbal garden with mint and oregano and basil and marjoram and thyme, and this just really brings back a lot of great memories for me of kind of going and, you know, cutting in her garden and just getting all those beautiful smells from not only just the herbs but also the flowers that she raised next to them. So the next one that we're going to try is actually Blanton's. Now you'll hear about Blanton's. A lot of times people will consider this a gold standard. And if you're not in Kentucky, or even if you are in Kentucky, sometimes this can be really hard to find. That's because everybody wants a Blanton's, right? Blanton's was actually a single barrel pick, and it started, I believe, with Albert Blanton. And what he did is he found that he had certain customers that he would go and he would pick a special single barrel. And he would basically bottle that barrel, and he would, you know, sell it to these favorite folks. Now this kind of started the whole single barrel craze and the whole single barrel note. So you'll start to see a lot more of that as you go try different bourbons. They'll say, oh, this is a single barrel. Many of these, except for these store picks, are generally a blended. When we talk about blended, that's generally some newer barrels, some older barrels, and they might take them from the top of the warehouse to the bottom of the warehouse to kind of get a special blended flavor. And they'll generally do that for these more flagship, higher volume bourbons so that you have a consistent taste and a consistent flavor. So you always know this is what a Buffalo Trace is going to taste like. A Blanton's, however, has a special space in the warehouse, and that's really important because in the rick houses or the warehouses, they are not temperature controlled in general. What they basically do is they rely on nature. So if you have something that's higher up in the rick house, you'll probably get a lot more evaporation, gets a lot more heat. If it's something lower, it's a little bit colder. And you'll see, even with barometric pressure, you'll see the movement within the barrel. And so you'll get all those lovely flavors depending upon where it's coming from. So Blanton's, as you can see, is a little bit darker, for example, just a smidge than the Buffalo Trace. It's also aged a little bit longer. So on this, you get a lot more caramel licorice flavor on this. I'm getting on this particular bottle, I'm getting a licorice note. In tasting it, I'm getting a little bit more on the sweeter. It's a little bit more like those old-fashioned candies, things like Horehound and anise, and but a little bit more of that sweet, kind of that really unique kind of flavor of hard candies that maybe your grandmother used to serve, and you used to go, oh, I didn't like it, but now kind of brings back good memories. And it's actually pretty interesting, and it doesn't taste like what you would normally think. So this one actually I really like. It's very smooth. It doesn't give you that harsh flavor even without the water. And that's something you want to look for, because this one, for example, was aged, let's see, it was dumped on 6/2019, but it was aged a lot longer. Generally what it'll tell you here how long it was aged. I don't quite have this generally, but it'll be, 4-6 years, something like that. So opening it up, Now I'm getting a lot more of that hard candy notes. It really makes me think of like a hard candy apple, where you have that kind of that sweet, and then you kind of bite into that, you know, that Northern Spy or the Gala apple or something that's not quite a Granny Smith but has a little bit more flavor. And it's really kind of fun. Now the unique thing about Blanton's, and I kind of wanted to show you, is this was my Mother's Day present, believe it or not, many years ago. Not just the Blanton's, but the horseshoe. And the unique thing about the horseshoe is that each bottle top is a different letter of Blanton's. So B-L-A-N-T-O-N-S. And if you look, you can see it's actually a race. So it's basically the positions of a rider and a horse in a race, such as the Kentucky Derby. So it's pretty cool. I have that, and they also make beautiful decorative lamps. Now, on to the unique one. My favorite guy, E.H. Taylor. Colonel E.H. Taylor was one of the founders of basically the Food and Drug Act and really making sure that our food was pure. Well, why would basically a guy who's selling whiskey be so fundamental in making sure we have good food and that we have purity in what we eat and drink? Well, that's because back in the day, I used to have whiskey makers, and they would have everything in it. They might put in prune juice, tobacco spit. In fact, I have a recipe from a Depression era time from my husband's family that basically explains how to make whiskey with basically liquor and a bunch of raisins so that you get the color. You can imagine it's going to taste pretty bad. So Colonel Taylor was like, hey, listen, I'm selling quality product. I got these other jokers that are selling just stuff that tastes terrible. I want to distinguish that my stuff is good. So he created the yellow label, but he also made sure that he did something called bottle and bond. And I talked about that a little bit before. Bottle and bond is, oh, that's right, it's always 100 proof. It conforms to bourbon, which is the basically 51% corn, made in the United States. It's aged in new oak containers, not necessarily barrels, but barrels are the most efficient. And this has to be aged for 4 years in a federally guarded warehouse. Now, if you go to places like Woodford Reserve, you go there, you'll actually see the old house where the government regulator actually stayed. And they had blocks that only the federal government regulators could open. So they verified that nobody was going in and putting in stuff in that whiskey. So Colonel Taylor has a bottle and bond, small batch, rye, barrel proof, but one of the ones he's very famous for, or at least Buffalo Trace is 4 grain. Now this 4 grain we bought actually, I believe it was 2018. So it's been around our shelf for a while, but I will say it's extremely unique. The 4 grain is actually the 4 grains, which is of course corn, of course malted barley, rye, and I believe this one also has wheat. So it's the 4 different grains. So on this one, again, comparing to that Buffalo Trace, you'll see definitely it's a darker color because it's been aged longer. So on the smell, ooh, this is fun. This one has just so many different flavors. It's got fruit and floral on it. It's got a little bit of candy on it. Oh, it's got a little bit of sweet, but yet it's got definitely some more herbal notes on it. It is a slight pecan on it. It makes me really think of not as sweet as a pecan pie, but if I took a pecan pie and didn't put so much sugar in it, it would remind me of that. It's really got those nice nut notes in it, as well as the fact that it's nice and smooth, but it isn't too harsh. It doesn't give you the harsh oak tobacco element that you might taste. It doesn't have any kind of that malty kind of funny flavor. It's just really nice, and it gives a little bit of sweet caramel just right on top of the pecan. So it kind of makes me think of a praline. My grandmother lived in New Orleans while I was a youngster, and it definitely makes me think of basically the Market Street where we used to go to buy pralines in downtown New Orleans in the French Quarter. So this one I'll be finishing later for sure. So that's kind of the first basics. And now for all of you, especially my cousin Lindsay, who are like, yeah, I like it, but man, it's just not sweet enough for me. I really like to sweeten it up. I'm going to show you a real quick recipe for a whiskey sour, which is a perfect thing to do this time of year. So basically, I have my own fresh squeezed lemon, real easy to do, where you just buy squeezed lemon. And then I have honey simple syrup. And all I did is I took basically 1 cup honey, 1 cup water. You can take a little bit less water if you want. And I basically just kind of melted it down so it's not so sticky when it gets inside. Then I have my little beaker. And so I'm going to measure my lemon, which in this case is about 2 ounces or 1/4 cup. In this particular case, I use about 1/2 ounce because I like mine a little snappier in terms of the snappiness of the tart. Then I'm going to take my Buffalo Trace. And again, I love using these things from KitchenAid stuff. The OXO, it's a really great thing. In fact, some of the higher end level places, you'll see that. And when you're getting a drink, by the way, you want to watch the bartender. You want to make sure that they're actually measuring what they're actually putting into your drink. Reason being for 2 reasons. One, you want to make sure that you get a nice balanced beverage. But the second thing is that you also want to make sure that you get your liquor, because that's what you're paying for. So again, just a simple salad shaker, $10, Bed Bath & Beyond. Shake it up. Now this you could either have cold, or like I like to do, I like to go over some big ice, just because it kind of makes it it dissipates it just a little bit more. So I'm going to put some big ice in there because big ice is fun. Doesn't quite fit, but I'm going to pour this over. And you're going to see it'll go all around there and melt my ice down, maybe drip, who knows. A little bit too much, but that's okay. And for me, my favorite thing to do, because I'm a Michigan gal, is I like to have a cherry. Cherry on top is always fun, right? Just like a sundae, but it's a whiskey sundae. So I make my own. I actually take Michigan cherries and I just put them in simple syrup and basically can them, and I have my own. You can buy Luxardo. You'll hear about Luxardo. And you can just get a straight maraschino cherry, which is fun, but not quite as good as a Luxardo. So with that, you kind of got an introduction to some different types of bourbons, Major Family, as well as Lindsay. Here's your whiskey sour. Cheers.